Hello, this is me, Erika Stahlfen-Holstein.
And this is Luca De Biase. Welcome to Re-Imagine Talks, the podcast to challenge the way we think.
Today we are delighted to be here to challenge the traditional concept of power with Manuel Castells.
Manuel Castells has shaped our understanding of the political dynamics in the network society. Professor and Wallis Annenberg Chair in Communication Technology and Society at the University of Southern California, Castells' academic career involves most of the leading universities in the world. He has authored 35 books, and he is a former Minister of Universities of the Spanish government. His work has changed the way we think about how society organizes around the complex reality of the network. Who better to help and understand what's happening today and how to reimagine power?
So maybe we should start with with a fundamental question. What do we mean by power and why is it so important?
First of all, thanks to you and to everybody involved in this process for giving me the opportunity and the pleasure to comment with my European fellows a very important question, which is not theoretical only, because it's what people feel in their life every day, every minute. Even when they don't think about power, they are in a power relationship, most people in a subordinated power relationship. So it's important to know what it is, particularly if you are not satisfied with being under one particular set of power and you would like to change. It's important to know what you have to change, because without knowing what you want to change, you cannot change anything. So if you ask me about what is power, well, power traditionally, this is not innovation, power is the capacity of some humans to compel or influence the behavior of other humans so that they behave according to the power, the interests and values of the power holders.
And why is it so important in understanding the role of power in our society today?
It's not only today. Throughout human history, power is what I would call the DNA of societies. But because whoever has power, being a person, institutions in which one person or several persons are critical, whoever has power has the capacity to set up the rules, the norms and the institutions of society under which we live. So it's the DNA of societies and it's our code of behavior, which is enforced by the institution. We are free, yes, we are free within the conditions of what those in power consider acceptable or not acceptable. Fortunately, power is not absolute power, with some exceptions in history, even in moments of an absolutist regime. There's always some resistance. There's always people saying, no way. Usually they are killed, but in principle, there has always been, where there is power, there is resistance to power. In fact, where is domination of power? In terms of power, power is a relationship, can be accepted, not accepted, fought against. And so I say that, in fact, the institutions of society are built around the dynamics, the relationship between power and counterpower. Counterpower is the attempt by those humans who do not feel represented in the institutions of society under the power conditions existing in every moment to try to modify the program, to modify which are the rules of society. And for that, different ways, from struggles and even in some cases challenges in revolutionary terms, to in our democracies through mobilization, trying to win new elections. So the result of power and counterpower is the set of norms and institutions under which we live and by which we live. And that, to some extent, means that it's changing constantly. Every day, there are attempts to impose power according to the established norms and challenge power.
We are currently seeing big upheavals in society. There are power and counterpower are working at present. How do you understand the change in this? How is changing the relationship between these different powers in a network society after so many years of the internet being important in our world?
Well, to understand this, we should remember that there are two fundamental forms of power throughout history. And in fact, all the theories of power can be reduced to two. Power by coercion and power by persuasion. Although power by coercion is more decisive, I mean, you do this or I shoot you, or I send you to jail, but power by persuasion, it's actually more effective because it influences our minds. Now, in the age of the internet, what has happened is that communication has been largely decentralized, and the social media world, which is much more autonomous in terms of the messages, not in terms of the ownership of the corporations, but in terms of the messages, there are many more people intervening in this dialogue and in this opposition and in these controversies than in the world in which the mass media would actually shape most of the communication. It's what I call, we have shifted not to the digital freedom, we have shifted from mass communication to mass self-communication. Why self? Because people construct their own networks. In principle, they produce their own messages and then at the same time, senders of the messages and receivers of the messages. This is new. Constant interaction and constant decentralization of the communication system. But then what? Well, the people who do have power mobilize their resources also in the social media to prevail in terms of shaping behavior. And this is the fundamental reason why social media, rather than being an electronic agora, is a battlefield between different project ideas and manipulations that happen all the time.
And in one of my favorite books that you wrote, Communication Power, you underline the importance of the communication for power, and the fact that power is transformed to some extent through the communication networks. It's become a very popular thing in recent years to blame social media and the internet for a lot of the problems that we are seeing today. How do you see the relationship between the arrival of digital technologies and at the same time the kind of fragmentation of society and increase in unrest across democratic societies across the world?
Well, first of all, remember that we talk about the power of ideas, but ideas are, in terms of communication and a broad communication system, they are only as powerful to influence behavior as they are able to trigger emotions. Remember, what neuroscience has demonstrated is that we are emotional animals. It's our emotions, our feelings, that what determines our behavior. One of the key mistakes with enormous practical consequences of liberal democracy is to think that rational policies, better policies in rational terms, will convince people. Not at all. Not at all. It's good for government, for institutions to have reasonable policies, definitely. But this is not the way they are going to convince people. If there are very strong emotions, the fact that you have a good, sensitive economic policy, that you control the debt, that you control the traffic in cities, is not going to change the fundamental tenements. And so the real issue is how then we trigger positive emotions rather than negative emotions. And that is not about policy making, it's about communication making. Now, is the digital technology and social media nowadays the guilty parties in the disruption that we observe in society? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because technology does not determine. Technology is a mediation. So what the internet does is to favor unimpeded communication among people. And so this capacity of people expresses the variety of humans in any society and the variety of ideas and projects. Now, internet is a mirror of our society, it's a mirror of ourselves. If we are not nice people, that will be reflected in the internet. So we actually welcome, and I did, and many people did, the advent of internet as a technology of freedom. And it is a technology of freedom. It is. We just forgot that freedom doesn't mean good.
I think that many in our kind audience have found the truth of these words by you, Professor. There is also another thing to explain. There is a paradox between the fact that the internet was born as the machine of freedom, enabling every individual to express herself. At the same time, there is a concentration of power in the hands of a small amount of big, very big companies. How do you explain that?
We have to make a difference between the control of ownership and the control of the content and the control of the substance of the communication. Meaning that if we remember that what is the basic business model of all these companies, or all the internet companies, is traffic, density of traffic, because they live out of our data, out of selling our data or using our data mainly for advertising. 91% of Google's revenue comes from indirect advertising. 91%, according to Google itself. So, therefore, the companies are not interested in creating any barrier for unimpeded communication. I like better unimpeded than free, but free depends, it's a broader concept. So companies are interested in more and more traffic. That's why polarization helps them. Because polarization means you say something, I'm going to say the contrary, and I'm going to fight you to the end. Fighting to the end meaning communicating to the end. And that's traffic. Okay? So neither in terms of the business models, nor in the possibility of monopolizing the content and the traffic, the companies stop the so-called unimpeded communication in the internet. The monopoly of ownership, yes. Monopoly of communication, no.
You mentioned earlier that social media is not to blame about it's not the cause of what we're seeing now, but more can be seen more of as a catalyst. Yet we are seeing growing distrust all across the world. If you look at the trust barometers. We're seeing trust in governments and in, I would say, traditional institutions of power decrease all over the world. This is not only a European problem, it's a global problem. How would you explain this, I would say, systemic trend?
Liberal democracy is losing its social basis of political representation, both because of the deeper causes of people feeling totally excluded of any process of decision-making except putting their vote in the box one every 4 years. Except that, they don't have any other channel of political representation or any other control. So what they do, when they can, they protest. When they can, they support parties that place themselves outside the system to then go into the system. As soon as they go into the system, soon thereafter, they are integrated into the rules of the system, even the extreme right, even more so because they are more democratic than the people in the left. And then they come to be considered the same. The famous term years ago that started in Italy, we are against the casta. Who is the casta? The casta is the political establishment of all kinds. So as soon as those who were criticizing the casta, Podemos in Spain, Cinque Stelle in Italy, come into the government, I don't say that they become the casta, but many people, millions, think now they are the new casta. So the bond of trust has been broken in most societies for most people. And that, to repair, that is extremely serious because remember, emotions is dictated by emotions. So unless we are able to develop positive emotions in a real way and then engage in a process of communication that is effective, the whole trend is accelerating.
But in this new world that is created by the network architecture of society, is a new idea of power emerging, or is it possible a new balance of power?
Well, in principle, now we are in a world of network power as well, because there is the networks of power, rather than being separated historically or concentrated in one place. Now you have both nationally and internationally. The nodes, the key nodes in the power network are finance, technology companies, traditional political parties, traditional state bureaucracies, the media business, and the large corporations. All this is network. So each node of power has its own dynamics and its own interest, but all this is network.
You mentioned that people have lost trust in the existing, I would say, forms of power, whether it's political or financial, and with a lot of right, following your recent statements. Do you see some new forms of power emerging around the world?
I see my hope always throughout my observation of many countries in my life has always been social movements, meaning not political movements, although they do have political consequences. But I consider social movements those movements, autonomous movements, not linked to any political party or option, that are cultural movements. They try to change the values of society. Now, thinking broadly, in Europe, I think the real problem is that there has been very little capacity in the political system to translate the energy generated in social movements into new policies and into the possibility of re-legitimizing the institutions. The environmental movement, Greta in Sweden. Well, not only Greta is disappointed, but most of her young followers are disappointed. They do not consider that Europe is facing seriously the climate crisis, which is fundamental, of course. So that's the problem. The problem is not so much where there are the sources of change. The sources of change ultimately need a relay at the level of the political institutions, and this is not happening. So why am I still optimistic? Because history never ends, and because the lessons of history mean that even when we do not see the embryos of something new, when we not see social movements or different cultural trends, they are there. They are there. And they may, but that's wishful thinking certainly, but they may coalesce at one point and provoke new social movements that will develop new forms of decentralized democracy, because I think countries, systems do not change by choice. They change by necessity. When we are on the edge of catastrophe, then there is some reaction. In my book, Rupture, my conclusion was that what I foresee, since I don't see the way democracy can change these matters, what I foresee is chaos. It's chaos. But I added, but chaos can come in different formats. And my hope is creative chaos, meaning that in a chaotic situation, things that appear to be impossible become possible. People find some openings, some windows toward their future, and things may change in that sense.
That was Professor Castells and his view on power, and a lot of food for thought for reimagining power.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Erika, how do we make the impossible possible? Can we reimagine power?
Well, I think there are some key takeaways of this fascinating conversation, and these are the following. Number one, power is changing constantly, and we're currently living in a battlefield of new ideas, and that is why communication is so important. Secondly, the internet and the social media are an amazing medium to be at the basis for a shift in power relations. But we have to remember that freedom does not mean good. The internet is a mirror of society. And that is where things get a little concerning. And this brings me to the third point I think we should take away. And that is that we cannot rely on the fact that the trajectory of power transformation is set on a course towards democratic, decentralized, and distributed power. It will be up to society to want this change and to fight for it. So let's reimagine power